Hello, and welcome to another Deconstructing Leftist program. This is John Butero, and on today's program, I want to talk to you about a radio host that was perhaps the greatest radio announcer of all time. And I've worked in radio a good bit of my life. I worked in AM radio for about 8 years. My very first job at age 15 was working in radio. And I still work in radio in the sense that it's a side thing. It's something I do for enjoyment. I run a 24-hour a day internet station that plays Southern Gospel over at Live 365 called WCB. The call letters actually mean Worldwide Christian Broadcasting, but it's listed as WCB America's Gospel FM. But it's just something, again, that I do on the side for enjoyment. Obviously, my job is still a truck driver. And again, today I am in my temporary studio, which is in a tractor trailer truck. It's really the only place I have to work out of right now because I'm on the road so much. But today I want to talk about, again, the man that I think is the greatest radio talk show host ever, and that would be Rush Limbaugh. The reason I'm bringing him up today is because it is January the 12th, and that is Rush Limbaugh's birthday. He was born on January the 12th, 1951, in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And for those of you who may not, I don't know if there's anybody out there that doesn't know who Rush Limbaugh is, but if you happen to be somebody who doesn't know who he is, maybe you've never listened to talk radio, it's nothing you've ever paid attention to, I will tell you a little bit about him. He was the host of the Rush Limbaugh radio show that originally aired in 1984, but it became syndicated in 1988, and it ran until 2021 when he passed away. He had a television show from 1992 to 1996. His radio show became the most listened to radio show in all of America at its peak. He wrote two books in the 90s, one of them in 1992 called The Way Things Ought to Be, one in 1993 called See, I Told You So. Both of them became bestsellers. And by the way, I have both of those books. I bought them both when they first came out in hardback, and I love both of them. But if you could get a copy of either one of them, my personal recommendation would be The Way Things Ought to Be. I found that the better one. I remember back at the time, Rush Limbaugh seemed to like his second book better, but as somebody who was a fan of his show, I would recommend the first one because it gives a lot of personal information about Rush Limbaugh in that, things that he believed in and personal things about him. So that would be the one I would recommend if you can only get one of them. I also think it's less dated than the second one. He was inducted into the National Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2020 by President Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you from my personal opinion, he's one of the most deserving recipients there's ever been, because he's a man who was a true patriot, really loved this country, and through his radio program did a whole lot to make America a better place. He exposed a lot of things that were going on that people wouldn't have known about if it hadn't been for his radio show. So to me, he was a very deserving award winner. He worked to raise money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I remember he used to do annual radiothons to raise money for that. And he also raised money for the Marine Corps Law Enforcement Foundation, and they gave scholarships to children of Marines and law enforcement officers and agents who died in the line of duty. Now, I remember a bit of a controversy where he had given a donation, a personal one, to the Pediatric AIDS Foundation, And I recall him talking about the possibility of even doing fundraisers for them, but that because of their concerns over his association with them and some of his views concerning LGBTQ, they were kind of concerned about that. And I'm pretty sure that that's what led to him going to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I couldn't find anything to verify that. That is based on, I did find something to verify he gave $10,000 personally to them, but I couldn't find anything that could absolutely verify that he wanted to do more for them. And so I'm saying that based on my personal memories, and that goes back a long time ago. But he never seemed to have any bad feelings about him not wanting to take it, and even seemed to understand it. But it seems like to me that's when he went to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. But he did do good charity work in raising money for those things. Now, that's just some basic information about Rush Limbaugh. His television show, I remember watching it. It used to come on late nights, like 11 or 11:30 every night, and I really did enjoy that. There was certainly some controversies on that show at times. Everything Rush Limbaugh did was controversial. In his early days in radio and television, and during his television time, I think he did some things almost intentionally to stir up the pot, so to speak. Not that he wasn't being sincere, but I think there were certain things he did that weren't, they were done like for shock value a little bit. I think certain things he did were, but I remember, for instance, a controversy that took place over an innocent word of farding that had to do with women applying makeup. And I'm not going to get into the specific details of it, but you can kind of tell that word sounds similar to another word. And I think that he intentionally let people think he was saying something that he wasn't saying to create a controversy. He would kind of do certain things like that at times on his show. But anyway, he was very good. He was very good at entertaining people. He was excellent at that. And I know he's known for his political views, but he was also a great entertainer. He had a sense of humor, and that really came through in his show. And it was one of the things I enjoyed listening to his show for, was his humor. But I want to talk to you just a few minutes about how I became a Rush Limbaugh listener and ditto head. And by the way, if you don't know what a ditto head is, it's a regular listener that thought he was the greatest talk show host out there. And people would call in and they would say dittos or mega dittos if they really loved his show. It was just kind of a short way to avoid him having to come on there and say, "Man, I love your radio show." You know, instead of doing that, they just say dittos Rush or mega dittos. And I think his show was the greatest show on the radio at the time, and certainly I would consider myself a ditto head at the time. Now, I say that even though I didn't always agree with him 100% of the time on everything he said and did, but I still think he was the greatest talk show host at the time, and I did agree with him a lot. I would say I agreed with him probably easily over 90% of the time, but not on every single point. But how I got to listening to Rush Limbaugh was kind of interesting, because it wasn't a conservative that turned me on to him. Back in 1990, I was working at a Walmart, and I was working in the section that covered automotives and sporting goods. And a guy that I worked with a lot of the time back then was a Democrat. Now, he wasn't a Democrat like the crazy lunatic Democrats that we have today. I would say he was probably a center-left Democrat. He wasn't somebody like that we see in AOC or somebody like that today. But he was a Democrat. He voted Democrat. He'd been raised that way, and I guess he's still a Democrat. But he's the one who introduced me to Rush Limbaugh. We were just talking politics in general one day, and we didn't ever have any heated discussions or anything like that. We got along okay, a working relationship. But he told me, he says, "You sound just like Rush Limbaugh." He was talking about my views. And I said, "Who's Rush Limbaugh?" And he said he's a guy on the radio. He's a talk show host. And at the time, I didn't even listen to talk radio, didn't even know about it. It was kind of still a little bit in its infancy in 1990. It probably only been, 24-hour talk show stations for, a couple of years in the area. Certainly when it wasn't big like it is today. But I was somebody who pretty much listened to music all the time. It could be anything from pop music, classic rock, country, southern gospel. That's pretty much what I listened to at the time. And so anyway, I told him I'd check him out. And so when I was on lunch break one day, I turned on the Rush Limbaugh show for the first time. And he had something going on regarding McDonald's. I can't tell you exact details of it, but there had been some kind of attacks on McDonald's by some people. I don't know if it was over the unhealthy food or what it was, but Rush was buying McDonald's food for everybody in the studio. And that was kind of what was going on during the time when I happened to tune in. And I wasn't that totally impressed with it. I really didn't get Rush Limbaugh on the first time I listened to him. And I remember talking to this Democrat guy and telling him, I really wasn't that impressed with the first time of hearing his show. But I decided on my own, you know what, I'll check him out another time. And after listening to him again a couple of more times, I just totally got hooked on his show. And I found that I actually did agree with him most of the time. And I would try to listen to as much of it as I possibly could, given the fact that I oftentimes was working when his show was on. I worked in sporting goods, and we had, again, Automotives was right next to us, and there was a bunch of radios on display next to us, and they were working radios. So a lot of time I'd turn on Rush Limbaugh while I was working. I could hear it on one of those car radios. And as much as there wasn't somebody in there turning the station, I would listen to it. And then when they would leave, I would turn it back to the Rush Limbaugh show while I was working. So I'd listen to him quite a bit. I like I said, totally hooked on his show. It became must listen to radio for me at the time. And it was a combination of just, he was a great entertainer and very informative. So I loved his show. He didn't turn me into a conservative. I was already a conservative. He just was, it was kind of like solidarity with somebody else who believed a lot of the same things. Now, again, not all the same things. Back then, I was, even at that time, I was an America First nationalist, and I was a supporter of Pat Buchanan. One minor difference between me and Rush Limbaugh back in 92, I remember, is he was encouraging people to vote for Buchanan in the primary to send a message to George H.W. Bush because he had reneged on his no new taxes pledge. Well, I voted for Pat Buchanan, but not because of Rush Limbaugh. I did because he was really who I was favoring. And Rush Limbaugh was just doing it to send a message. He wanted to send a message to George H.W. Bush. You need to get your act in order and be a conservative. And then I remember later on when Rush Limbaugh was supporting Steve Forbes. Now, he would tell you he didn't have a specific Republican candidate he was endorsing, but he was gushing all over Steve Forbes as to where you knew that's who he was for. I was never for Steve Forbes. I was supporting Pat Buchanan in 92 and in 96. And at the time, I was more of an isolationist. I still am, really. America First, and even supported tariffs when Pat Buchanan did, because I believed in equal trade, not free trade back at the time. Rush Limbaugh, your traditional Republican, all for free trade, supported NAFTA and GATT. And there was a bit of time there where I was okay with NAFTA. I never supported GATT, but later on I decided I didn't like either one of them. I didn't think they were fair trade deals. So, a lot of people talk about, Donald Trump and America First nationalism, all that stuff. He wasn't the first. Pat Buchanan was all those things back in the day. And so, in my support for these things, I've always supported those things, way on back to there. But when you got beyond those things, I mostly agreed with Rush Limbaugh. And throughout the years he was on the radio, I mostly agreed with him. And I loved his show. I loved his personality. And I even got to feel like he was kind of a friend, even though I'd never met him. He was a man I would have loved to have been able to meet and sit down and talk to. He was just seemed like just a great person. Didn't agree with everything he did. I remember back at the time, I didn't like his promoting cigarettes, knowing how dangerous they were. And of course, it ended up leading to him eventually dying from lung cancer. I wish that he hadn't continued to smoke. I know he went to cigars later on, but cigars are not a safe alternative. We nowadays we should know how dangerous tobacco products are, and so I encourage everybody to stay away from them. Personally, never agreed with his promoting cigars and all that stuff on the air. But I got to looking at Rush Limbaugh as a friend, and you can develop relationships like that with people on radio and television, and even actors and actresses over time. And you can even feel a loss when something happens to him, and that's the way it was with Rush Limbaugh. He's not the only one I developed a relationship like that with. I used to listen to Braves baseball games on a regular basis. I mean, I was a truck driver, and I'd listen sometimes to over 100 games out of the 162 game season, and I felt like I developed a relationship with Skip Carey and Pete Van Wieren at the time. And I remember I took it very hard when Skip Carey died. He died in the middle of the season. So it isn't just Rush Limbaugh. And I used to listen to Coast AM with Art Bell during the middle of the night. And I got to know him, and I felt a loss when he died too. But I felt like I had a relationship with Rush Limbaugh. And I did take it personal when that he died. It was like a real loss of a friend, even though I had never met him. But he had a way of being able to keep his audience going, even when he could do 3 hours a day, every day, and he could carry the show by himself with no guests. Very few people could do that. You've got somebody like Sean Hannity, and he's able to do a show, and a lot of people enjoy listening to him, but I never really found him as interesting as Rush Limbaugh. And a lot of it was dependent on his guests, as I even would stay listening to him. But Rush Limbaugh, he was just great, just carrying the whole show by himself. And so anyway, I didn't want to let this date go by without mentioning him. So I just wanted to say that I wanted everybody to kind of remember Rush Limbaugh on his birthday. And in my recommended videos, I linked to a video where he did a speech at Turning Point USA. So if you get a chance to watch it, it's a really good speech. And if you've never really listened to Rush Limbaugh, it's definitely worth checking out. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the program with that today. And Lord willing, I'll be back again soon with another Deconstructing Leftist program. Take care.